Thank you so much, John, and everybody at RDAP for letting me speak today. This is really a great pleasure. I'm actually presenting on behalf of a larger team who are all currently representing institutions that are members of the Data Curation Network. My team members are listed here. So I might be talking about some of their repositories along the way, but certainly you can approach any one of these folks and they'd be happy to answer your questions. So I think it's already kind of been very well established that data curation is a good thing. We are hosting data repositories and we are enabling researchers to meet their funding requirements and their journal requirements to share their data. But we also know that just sharing data is not enough. We really need to go beyond that and work with them to ensure that the data can be properly cited, that they have persistent identifiers, that they have enough documentation to allow for future use. And we also know that there is a lot of evidence, a lot of growing body of evidence to show that curation does make data more valuable. And our role within a data repository is to ensure that these data can be trusted and reused. Unfortunately, it's not always that easy. I think Anna gave a really great example in the first talk to illustrate why you really need somebody who has additional expertise around the type of data that we're curating to be able to ask the right kind of questions, to be able to identify what files are missing or what is the key pieces of information that might be necessary for this particular type of data for it to be reused. So data curation can be a challenge, just really due to the large variety of data that our researchers are generating. So those of us in the Data Curation Network, rather than relying on maybe a third-party curation service, we really turned toward each other. And we said, hey, we've got a lot of expertise already here in our institutions. Let's partner. Let's share those staff members who bring those skill sets in disciplinary domain knowledge and in software and code. Bring them together to really create a network of data curation. And that's what we've been doing for the last couple years. Actually, we just entered our implementation phase this June. So right now we've got 8 institutions that are bringing data curators who have expertise in curating genomics files or curating Python code, and we're sharing them across our organizations. So this is a collaborative staffing model for data curation. It's been funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and our goal is really to grow this network and to add on new partners and new member institutions as we go. Just a little bit about us, though. We are very different organizations in the sense that we're all approaching data curation a little bit differently. So we really intentionally created a network where data could flow through the Data Curation Network and be curated by people at other institutions who might have different policies, who might have different workflows, and who certainly have different infrastructures. You'll see here the list of different technology platforms that each of our repositories are using. A couple of us are using DSpace. A couple of us are using Hydra and Vera. And then we also have Dataverse. So we do have sort of a representation of various different technologies. And each of our data repositories are at different levels of maturity, as well as the amount or the volume of data that's coming through us. And certainly the Dryad Digital Repository is a great example of really having a huge demand for the types of data that they're curating. As I mentioned, we launched just in June with our 3-year implementation phase. And our goal is to expand this incrementally, in particular in our 3rd year, which I'll get to in just a second. But just a little bit about what our model looks like. We just started actually running data through our workflow in the last couple months, and I'll show you some examples. But essentially, a lot of the repository functionality stays with the local institution. So we really expect each of our members to be doing their own sort of ingest of the data sets, to certainly run the data through their own appraisal processes. You know, they make the selection of, does this data fit within our policy and our scope for inclusion in our data repository service or our data curation service. That means we also can curate data sets that might be going to domain or national repositories. And that's certainly a really great use case when we're curating data locally, but they're being deposited to a national repository. We also expect the local institutions to sort of facilitate all of the access. So we're not the central repository. The DCN does not host the data. Each local institution performs the hosting services as well as the long-term preservation services and access. So instead, the DCN functions as a human layer in the repository stack, where the researcher deposits like normal, and then we kind of in the background can match make the data set depending on what kind of data it is to the right expert or curator within the network. And then once the curator is assigned a data set, we have a standardized set of procedures that each curator can walk through to apply sort of the same level of curation to all the data sets that we curate. We are being very pragmatic about this approach. I think this was mentioned earlier by my colleagues in the presentation today that, you know, there's no such thing as a perfect data set. So we really do aim for getting the data set to be more usable and better than it came in, but understanding that this isn't, there's no aiming for perfection here. Part of what we do with our curate steps, so this is the check, understand, request, augment, transform, evaluate. We also added a D here, curated. D is for documentation, because we also want to capture all the steps that we do, is working through some checklists. So thinking about sort of the issues that you're going to run into with the data set. Is there missing documentation? Does the code not run? Those sort of things. Beyond that, we also are evaluating the data set for fairness and whether or not the data are meeting our criteria for reusability after the data curation has taken place. So once the curation efforts have been made, kind of circling back and asking, you know, is this data set well curated? So just to give you a few case examples, we had a couple test cases just in the last couple months. The first one was from the University of Illinois, the Illinois Data Bank, which is running on a Ruby on Rails repository as a custom solution that they developed there to work with their local preservation environment. So this data set actually came to us in a GitHub repository. So we can handle sort of the curation of the data files before they go live into the final repository. So we're doing some pre-ingest curation in this case. Also, this example, there were a lot of data files, R code, pulling from CSV files, all kind of packaged up. Luckily, we have some really great expertise from one of our co-PIs, Robert Ohlendorf, who is really great at R, and he was able to go through and work with the data author to increase the reusability of these files. The second one came from the University of Minnesota's data repository. This is DRUM, the one that I work with. We are running DSpace. And our data set involved software and code, which was in a number of different files and Python in particular, that related to a very large collection of image files. By very large, I mean 6 million images are actually being utilized by these code to understand camera trap images and to be able to detect what kind of animals are in the camera trap images. And so the size of these files and the number was quite a challenge as well. But one of our curators, Ashley Hedrick, who works at the University of Illinois, was able to run these files and actually detect an issue with the code that we were able to go back to the author and correct for the final version, which was great. The third test case, actually, came to us via an email file. So these files, again, were not uploaded to the repository, but were delivered to us via a different method. So we had a chance to work with the files before they went live. These were maybe more traditional data set files where they were Excel files associated with a publication. And we actually had 2 curators work on this to get a perspective of what maybe differences were being applied to a data set that was in a file type that a lot of us know and understand. And all of these test cases have really helped us develop our tracking mechanisms for how we want to monitor and better understand the level of curation that's being applied to each of the data sets, so we can sort of report out about, what are the disciplines that are really causing us a challenge, or what type of data really are adding, maybe a lot of time to the workflow. So they've been really interesting test cases, and have really set us up well, I think, for being able to kind of turn on the data curation network, which we aim to do next month. So that's just a little sneak peek about the kind of behind the scenes work that we've been doing, but we also tried to do a lot of work that is more community facing. So the data curation network, we actually have a separate grant from the IMLS to develop specialized data curation workshops. And this is really an opportunity for us to take the curation training that we offer to our network of curators and really position it outward facing so that we can work with a broader community of curators who aren't necessarily in the network but are looking to develop their professional skills and to share the expertise that they have in different file formats and types. So we've already hosted 2 of these so far. We just had one a couple weeks ago at DLS. These are 2-day workshops, and one of the really cool outcomes from these workshops that Cynthia Hudson-Vitale, I should say, is the lead on this at Penn State University, is the development of what we're calling data curation primers. So these are intended to be sort of a quick look at what is involved for a type of file. So one of the primers that was developed already at Michigan is for a NetCDF file format. And the primer gives you an understanding of what that file type is, what software is needed to open it, and really how do researchers use this file, what are the associated metadata of this file, all of the things that you would really need to know to get up to speed. So I think this is kind of one of the interesting successes of the Data Curation Network, is that not only can we share our staff across organizations, but we can also free up time locally to really dive deeper into an area that we have expertise in. And for Michigan, this was NetCDF files. And then be able to really establish some documentation and some procedures for that exact file type, and then share it more broadly with our community. So that's one of the, I think, one of the coolest aspects right now that is coming out of the Data Curation Network, that we're really very, very quickly and early on able to share out the information that we're gathering. Further down the road, we have a number of research questions that we're asking during this sort of implementation phase. First and foremost, we want to understand, how efficient is a networked approach for curating data. So we're going to be tracking a lot of statistics about the number of data sets that we're curating, when are the high volume times. At Minnesota, for example, we see a spike in data submissions happening and when school is not in session. So during winter break, during the summer, that's when we're seeing our kind of uptick in data submissions. I'm expecting that to happen for Thanksgiving. So it's really interesting to kind of see that. We're also going to be looking at the variety of data types and file formats. So what disciplines are we curating more often than not? What are the common file types that we're seeing? And really trying to understand where some of the investment in primers and those sort of resources could be more valuable. And then efficiencies, thinking about the time it takes for curation. A lot of these tasks can be time intensive. What are the costs in that? What is the resource investment in data curation? And then finally, we want to know, are curators getting, what are curators getting out of this process? How can we reward our curators? How can we demonstrate the expertise that they're putting into this work in a more public way? On the flip side of this, we also are taking the research questions around our data curation. Is data curation a value add type service? So really surveying our researchers, understanding their level of satisfaction with these services, tracking reuse indicators, but also kind of getting more into the observational evidence of our well-curated data more usable. In year 3 of its current phase, the data curation network will begin transitioning to a sustainable service model. So we really want to create a situation where institutional or disciplinary data repositories can join our effort and contribute data curation staff, but then also those who might not have curators at their institution can gain access to these services and be able to provide the type of curation that we're providing for our repositories locally. So some of the things that we really see here is being able to expand, of course, our network of experts we can rely on, but then also to provide this service and to increase the value of data housed in our local repositories. And by that, I mean we need to be able to show that the data that we're collecting and the data that we're stewarding are worth the time and effort and energy and resources that we're putting into it, and so that we can really continue to build trust with the researcher communities to establish libraries and institutional data repositories and disciplinary data repositories as trusted partners in this scholarly infrastructure. So I think I'm going to end it there, and I would be very happy to take any questions about the data curation network or any of the workflows that I've described here today.